Activist Neil Aggett will resume tomorrow. All parties involved in the inquest, including Judge Motsamai Makume, are currently visiting the Central Johannesburg Police Station, previously known as the John Voster Square, for an in-loco-inspection. 28-year-old Aggett, a medical doctor and union organiser, was found hanging in his cell at the station in February 1982. Our reporter Nozintombi Miya is at the site visit, and we cross to her live now. Nozintombi, what's happening where you are?
Well, a very good morning to you, Nompu. As you can see, the shot that we're on now is really the iconic shot of what was formerly known as the John Voster Square Police Station. You know, the mention of this police station would literally bring terror into the hearts of many South Africans, especially in the time of the 80s, the height at when Dr. Neil Aggett had been arrested. And this inspection in loco is quite important because it's to give the courts an overview really of the conditions that Dr. Neil Aggett faced in his 70 days of incarceration. And you know, obviously Dr. Aggett was one of, hundreds of detainees that made their ways through these steely, cold concrete walls here at what is now known as the Johannesburg Central Police Station. So what the judge will do, accompanied by lawyers from the state, lawyers from the Aggett family, and lawyers also representing implicated police officers, as well as the Aggett family media contingent and some witnesses. Those witnesses are obviously former police officers that worked here during the 80s. They'll be given a tour of the basement of this particular police station. And at the basement, that's where the cells were. And they'll be taken to the cell that Dr. Aggett had allegedly hung himself to death, according to the then apartheid police. And, obviously once that's done, once they've had a chance to look at the cell, they'll be taken up to the 8th and the 9th floors where a lot of the administration had really happened and a lot of the interrogation happened on the 8th and the 9th floors. And it's just to give them an idea, an overview of what journey Dr. Aggett would have walked in that 70 days that he was in incarceration. He would have been assaulted. He would have been electrocuted. He would have faced deprivation of sleep, deprivation of food. And it would have obviously been quite a grueling time. His sister, who's also here, Jill Berger, recounts how the last time she saw her brother, which was in December 1981, he looked absolutely emaciated, and he told them of the harsh conditions that he'd faced while he was interrogated. And he'd said that the police were accusing him of being a spy and having information, but he'd obviously denied any of that. And he'd said all he wanted was to make life better for the people that he served as a doctor at the Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital and the Tembisa Hospital, as well as changing the lives of the workers. He also worked as a trade unionist, and he was a part of spearheading the Transvaal Solidarity Union. And he basically said to Jill at the time that all he wanted was to change the lives of people who'd obviously gone through suffering, who'd obviously lived under such oppressive conditions. But this was not to be. He died a month later, 2 months later, in February, on the 5th of February in 1982. So obviously this inspection in Loco Nompu will certainly be quite illuminating and will give a visual representation of what Dr. Neil Aggett and hundreds of other detainees went through when they were booked into this particular policing facility.
So, Nozintombi, why is it so important for the family for this exercise to be gone through, even though it's very likely that most of the people who tortured this man and were responsible for his misery are likely dead?
And you're quite right with that, Nompu. We know that the chief prosecutor in the initial inquest in 1982, it was called the 1982 inquest, that looked initially into the suicide of Dr. Aggett. The chief prosecutor, his name was Stephen Whitehead. He passed away in April last year as a result of cancer. And Aggett's family is saying, when Whitehead passed away, he passed away with a lot of institutional knowledge and a lot of information that he'd received and processed in the 1982 inquest. And it's become very difficult for the family and the lawyers of the family, as well as the state, to try and trace back a lot of the information. You'll recall in yesterday's case, what the state had said that they really battled to get a hold of was Aggett's the post-mortem of Aggett, as well as the crime scene photos, and as well as some of the key testimonies that police made at the time, and including a statement that Aggett made 17 hours before his death, detailing really the traumatic and horrific conditions that he'd been subject to in that time that he'd been detained. So for Jill and the family, today is almost like a walking through a healing moment of sorts, to really see the conditions that their brother had gone through, and not just from the side of the visitors, but actually going to the cell and seeing that absolutely small cell that he was left in. He was incarcerated. I mean, it's just a cell with metal bars and concrete. It's absolutely dingy. It's depressing. You can imagine just the state in which Aggett was in, and a lot of the detainees that had also been detained at around the time, the absolute fear that they had that at any moment that day could be the last day that they're alive. Their families would never see them. And it's been absolutely emotional for Jill. You know, she's been struggling to hold back tears while the former police officers take her along with the contingent that's here through the cells, as well as to the 8th and the 9th floors here, the administration block, where you'll recall a lot of some of the prisoners were alleged to have thrown themselves from the 9th floor, the 6th floor. There's a very famous poem about it. And, you know, it's been absolutely emotional for Jill, but it will definitely be illuminating for the courts.
One last thing, who can we expect to be available for testimony? Who are going to be the witnesses?
So Wednesday, which is tomorrow, is definitely going to be quite an intense day. Jill will be taking the stand, and she'll be recounting the days leading up to Aggett's arrest, the 70 days of Aggett's arrest, as well as when they got news from the police that Aggett had died. And you'll recall in 1983, Jill left the country. She moved to England. She just simply couldn't cope with the sheer trauma and the stress of what had happened. Their parents subsequently passed away, and as well as Aggett's brother passed away. So she really, as a representative of the Aggett family, is bearing the weight of the emotion and seeing through this particular trial to its conclusion for justice, not just for Neil, but also for the Aggett family. So we are anticipating that her testimony on the stand will be quite illuminating and extremely heart-wrenching. And after her testimony, we anticipate that on Friday we'll be getting David Dyson, who was one of the junior attorneys who represented Aggett in the initial inquest in 1982. So that will also be quite interesting to get some of the information from Dyson, because Dyson would have gotten some of the documents that are currently missing now, some of the police documents that are currently missing now. So he would have had a first view at that, and he would have been able to really fill in the gaps and fill in the blocks where the police can't. So this week certainly is shaping up to be quite an explosive week with regards to the Aggett Inquest, and it's definitely one that we'll be keeping a very close eye on, Nompu.
Thanks very much for that, Nozintombi Miya, just covering that inquest on Neil Aggett.